Hello class, just one last video. This is standard ecosystems 4. So we talked about energy flow a lot already. Now we're going to talk about nutrient cycles, like how do nutrients actually cycle. So we're going to talk about 4 different nutrients, how they cycle, how they're not one-way flows, and how they actually travel through an ecosystem and not just they don't just flow one way into the ground or as heat. Okay. So these cycles, specifically, their name is called biogeochemical because it involves bio, meaning life, geo, meaning earth, and chemical, meaning chemicals. They are nutrient cycles that contain both biotic, living, and abiotic, non-living components. They include, traveling between organic and inorganic parts of an ecosystem. And the nutrient cycles we're going to talk about, so like what really cycles in an ecosystem, that's very important. Water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So here is a example of how different things sort of travel through the system. We're going to sort of skip over through this, but these are examples of, we were talking about organic and inorganic materials. Think about this one, reservoir A. Organic materials are available as nutrients, and we have living organisms and detritus that enjoy that. Another example, like think of another ecosystem, reservoir B. This is an example of organic materials that are not available as nutrients. So we talk about buried in the ground, we have coal and oil. So this is an example of materials that are not available. Reservoir C, these are inorganic materials that are available. So atmosphere, water, soil, these are things that are available. And an example of something that is inorganic and unavailable are minerals and rocks. So hopefully you guys understand organic and inorganic materials and the difference between them. So we're going to go over 4 cycles. I'm going to go through this really quickly. We're going to have to go through this sort of more in depth when I see you. They're more detailed than what I'm going to explain to you in this lesson. Water cycle, everyone's favorite. It's also called the hydrologic cycle. So I don't know if you want to write that down somewhere. Hydrologic cycle. And everyone really knows about this because you're taught it in grade school. So wherever you want to start, let's just say we have rain. And the rain precipitates, or there's precipitation over land. It runs off. Or flows through the soil and eventually into waterways like rivers and lakes, and eventually flows into an ocean. Over this ocean, because of the heat from the sun, it evaporates, and inside or up in the clouds, they sort of condense condensation into clouds and starts to cycle all over again. That is one example. You should know at least one example of nutrients that cycle. Okay. Carbon cycle, one that some of you may not know as clearly, but I think it's very easy to visualize. The carbon cycle, another way to think about it is think about carbon dioxide. The normal carbon cycle, like what the carbon cycle should be, is we breathe out carbon dioxide. We breathe out carbon dioxide, and plants and other photosynthetic plants or animals, they take in our carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, and we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. So when we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, that's called respiration. When plants take in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, that's called photosynthesis. So this is what the cycle should look like, just this. And eventually we die, consumers die, plants die, and they go into the ground, and this carbon is sort of stored into the ground. And you may not know this, but after millions and millions of years, when we die, or when the dinosaurs died, after a lot of pressure and time, we turn into oil, or our bodies and organic material turn into oil into the ground forever. So that's the cycle. Breathe in, breathe out, plants, animals, eventually we die, all the carbon stuck in the ground. But you know that it's a little bit more than this. We extract this from the ground and actually put way more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than they're supposed to be. This sort of screws up or messes up this cycle, but that is the carbon cycle. Carbon dioxide is removed by photosynthesis, and then we add it back into the air when we burn fossil fuels, wood, stuff like that. And then these two are the more harder cycles. Most people are confused about it or forget it, so I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to oversimplify this real quick. Sure. Nitrogen fixation is when, so there's the most abundant nutrients or chemical in the atmosphere. Some people say it's oxygen, or some people say it's carbon dioxide. But actually the most abundant is nitrogen. But it's not usable. Like the nitrogen that we breathe right now, like breathe in, breathe out, you can't do anything with it. It doesn't do anything. Okay, plants can't use it. Nobody can do anything with it. So what they do is something called nitrogen fixation. Plants, sort of like, I guess you could say they're called, gosh, I forgot the name off the top of my head, but there are plants that they could nitrogen fixate. Oh, legumes, like beans and stuff like that. Those type of plants, they could take nitrogen from the air and turn it into something that plants can use. So it has to be a plant that has bacteria on it. Then they do something called nitrification. They turn the nitrogen into ammonium, from ammonium into nitrite, nitrite into nitrate, and now these nitrates, these are actually something that plants can use. So now the plants sort of absorb the nitrogen, which it couldn't do before unless I had these nitrogen fixators. And then denitrification is from decomposers. Once these plants die or they go into the ground, these decomposers, they eat the dead plants, and eventually they release nitrogen gas back into the air. So this one, it's sort of a complicated cycle and picture. So again, just notice these 3 steps, and I'll fill in the rest later. Nitrogen is fixed by plants from the sky. These plants also turn nitrogen into something usable, nitrogen into ammonium, ammonium into nitrite, nitrite into nitrate, and then plants can use it. And then denitrification, decomposers take these dead, decaying plants and eventually turn them into nitrogen gas, which is put back up into the air. And phosphorus, again, another one that's not as well known. It's also very, very, very hard to visualize. Think about just rocks. So I don't know where you want to start. Think about phosphorus as rock. So we'll start in the ground. Because of decomposition and geologic uplift, just ocean currents, stuff like that, this sort of dust and stuff sort of comes back up into the air. Wind-blown dust, and the weathers the rocks. Eventually, it gets sort of taken away by the water cycle, and it goes up into the air, and it comes back down, or it runs off into the this phosphorus sort of runs off back into the land. Phosphates can actually be used by plants. Phosphate is one of those nutrients that plants need to grow. You know, we consume it, the plants use it, they die, and after years, they turn into like rocks in the soil, which goes into the ocean, which is geologically uplifted, which by wind and by rain flows back into the soil. So the phosphorus cycle, think rocks, think the boring cycle. It doesn't really move and go anywhere. Bless you. So a couple of things that you need to know, something called restoration ecology. So like, how do we fix ecosystems or cycles and flows that are broken? 2 things you need to know: bioremediation. You may have heard of remediation before, but bio, again, the prefix means life. So they use, instead of like fixing polluted ecosystems, some of you might say, hey, why don't we build a machine that like eats pollution? Like, oh, this destroys, this is destroying our ecosystem. Let's build a robot or make a chemical so it fixes it. Problem is, and maybe you know this, is that if I introduce something new, remember we talked about non-native stuff, like killer bees, is that once you introduce new things, it actually, makes more problems. So why they use bioremediation is because if we use organisms like prokaryotes, fungi, plant, natural stuff, then it actually doesn't create these new problems. And then bioaugmentation, augmentation means like to make bigger, is introduce desirable species to add essential nutrients. So if one ecosystem is lacking nitrogen, why don't we add more nitrogen fixers, plants like legumes, to create a lot more nitrogen. So here's a nice before and after picture. Those of you that like these before and after pictures, like on like P90X or something. This is the before 1991, and when they did this restoration, the bioremediation this bioremediation and bioaugmentation, look how different, same exact ecosystem, has changed. And that's actually something you guys can do, or something that if you want to do, you can do this for your quick science project. And then here's a bioremediation of groundwater with uranium. So these are restoration projects, one's in Florida, one's in Europe. They actually noticed that the groundwater, I don't know if you guys know this, but most of the water we drink is from the ground. Sounds disgusting, but it's true. We like pump it from the ground. And they use uranium to, it was contaminated with uranium. So what they do is they put in like natural stuff like fungi, bacteria, some of that natural stuff. And what they do is it eats the uranium. So instead of making a robot or a machine that would eat uranium, they just put in more plants and stuff. And look at these 2 pictures on the bottom in which they have restored an ecosystem that was once like up here, like looked terrible. So that's the last video on chapter 55. Hope you enjoyed these standard videos, and I'll see you guys later. Take care.